Hello everyone, today we read and comment the ninth chapter of the fifth book of von Clausewitz, Vom Kriege, its title being Camps. The text follows. We are now considering the three situations of an army outside of the combat only strategically, that is, so far as they are conditioned by place, time, and the number of the effective force. All those subjects which relate to the internal arrangement of the combat and the transition into the state of combat belong to tactics. The disposition in camps, under which we mean every disposition of an army except in quarters, whether it be in tents, huts, or bivouac, is strategically completely identical with the combat which is contingent upon such disposition. Tactically, it is only so always, for we can, for many reasons, choose a site for encamping which is not precisely identical with the proposed field of battle. Having already said all that is necessary on the disposition of an army, viz., on the position of the different parts, we have only to make some observations on camps in connection with their history. In former times, that is, before armies grew once more to considerable dimensions, before wars became of greater duration, and their partial acts brought into connection with a whole or general plan, and up to the time of the war of the French Revolution, armies always used tents. This was their normal state. With the commencement of the mild season of the year, they left their quarters and did not again take them up until winter set in. Winter quarters at that time must to a certain extent be looked upon as a state of no war, for in them the forces were neutralized, the wall clockwork stopped, quarters to refresh an army which preceded the real winter quarters, and other contemporary cantonments for a short time within contracted limits were transitional and exceptional conditions. This is not the place to inquire how such a periodical voluntary neutralization of power consisted with, or is now consistent with the object and being of war. We shall come to that subject hereafter. Enough that it was so. Since the wars of the French Revolution, armies have completely done away with the tents on account of the encumbrance they cause. Partly it is found better for an army of 100,000 men to have, in place of 6,000 tent horses, 5,000 additional cavalry, or a couple of hundred extra guns. Partly it has been found that in great and rapid operations a load of tents is a hindrance and of little use. But this change is attended with two drawbacks, that is, an increase of casualties in the force and greater wasting of the country. However slight the protection afforded by a roof of common tent cloth, it cannot be denied that on a long continuance it is great relief to the troops. But for a single day the difference is small, because a tent is little protection against wind or cold, and does not completely exclude wet. But this small difference, if repeated 200 or 300 times in a year, becomes important. A greater loss through sickness is just a natural result. How the devastation of the country is increased through the want of tents for the troops requires no explanation. One would suppose that on account of these two reactionary influences, the doing away with tents must have diminished again the energy of war in another way, that troops must remain longer in quarters, and from want of requisites for encampment must forego many positions which would have been possible had tents been forthcoming. This would indeed have been the case had there not been in the same epoch of time an enormous revolution in war generally, which swallowed up in itself all these smaller subordinate influences. The elementary fire of war has become so overpowering, its energy so extraordinary, that these regular periods of rest also have disappeared, and every power presses forward with persistent force towards the great decision, which will be treated of more fully in the ninth book. Under these circumstances, therefore, any question about effects on an army from the discontinuance of the use of tents in the field is quite thrown into the shade. Troops now occupy huts or bivouac under the canopy of heaven, without regard to season of the year, weather, or locality, just according as the general plan and object of the campaign require. Whether war will in the future continue to maintain, under all circumstances and all times, this energy is a question we shall consider hereafter. Where this energy is wanting, the want of tense is calculated to exercise some influence on the conduct of war, but that this reaction will ever be strong enough to bring back the use of tense is very doubtful, because now that much wider limits have been opened for the elements of war, it will never return within its old narrow bounds, except occasionally for a certain time and under certain circumstances, only to break out again with the all-powerful force of its nature. Permanent arrangements for an army must therefore be based only upon that nature. So in this chapter, von Clausewitz makes very interesting considerations about the nature of his own time's warfare, relatively to encampments, and also reflects on what will happen in the future. That is, yet another proof of the deep concern for the universal character of warfare in the Clausewitzian work that is often misunderstood as one of the other guy talks just about Napoleonic warfare. As we have repeated ad nauseum, this is not true, and I care in every video that can be independently listened by random users. I think it's important to repeat again. And there it goes, camps. We are now considering the three situations of an army outside of the combat only strategically, that is, so far as they are conditioned by place, time, and the number of effective force. All those subjects which relate to the internal arrangement of the combat and the transition into the state of combat belong to tactics. Right. So, von Clausewitz says then, the disposition in camps, under which we mean every disposition of an army except in quarters, whether it be in tents, huts, or bivouac, right, so not in the quarters where the army is normally stationed, right, to eventually go to the front, but specifically when it, goes out of it through the campaign, is strategically completely identical with the combat which is contingent upon such disposition, right? So this is interesting because it naturally reflects a parallelism between the way camps are organized and how things are going to tactically unfold. But still, von Clausewitz says tactically it is not so always, right? For we can, for many reasons, choose a site for encampment which is not precisely identical with the proposed field of battle. Having already said all that is necessary on the disposition of an army, that is, on the position of the different parts, we have only to make some observations on camps in connection with their history, right? So he goes, in former times, that is, before armies grew once more to considerable dimensions, before wars became of greater duration and their partial acts brought into connection with a whole or general plan, and up to the time of the War of the French Revolution, armies always used tents, right? So von Clausewitz is talking about this broader tentage that was used also, as we'll see now, in a quarter way, because the troops basically even went back and forth. There was specifically a season, winter, of course, in which they abandoned the thing and came back to fight on it. So that's interesting as well. And naturally, von Clausewitz is referencing to the French Revolution as basically the experience he has had since, that he joined actually the Prussian army at 12 in 1792. So we're exactly in the years of the wars of Prussia and the other allies, the coalitions against the French Revolutionary Army. So von Clausewitz leaves throughout all the thing. He has also a considerable role at the Battle of Waterloo and so on. And he has seen all the thing long. And naturally, he's also studied well the previous times. So he knows what it was before. And we have also seen it often, as he speaks often of the Prussian military tradition that objectively in the previous generations had been, the main deal in Europe, as far as especially the theory of the art of war was concerned, given the genius of Frederick, the innovations, and also the more structural in Europe growth of the system. So, as we've seen, the French Revolution accelerates really the forces involved in the power involved in war altogether. So, this brings to a sort of an hinging of a lot of more tendentially static way of war. Clausewitz says before this use of tanks was their normal state of the armies. He says, with the commencement of the mild season of the year, they left their quarters and did not again take them up until winter set in. Right? Winter quarters at that time must to a certain extent be looked upon as a state of no war, for in them the forces were neutralized. Literally, they went away. They weren't there guarding it. Right? Or better, yeah, of course it was a guard, but the force literally went away largely. The whole clockwork stopped. Right, this is a big deal of seasonal warfare, generally speaking. It was a serious thing. Way more in relative terms than it is today, naturally, to find in winter quarters to refresh an army, which preceded the real winter quarters and other temporary cantonments for a short time within contradicted limits were transitional and exceptional conditions. Then, this is not the place to inquire how such a periodical voluntary neutralization of power consisted with, or is now consistent with the object and being of war. We shall come to that subject hereafter. Enough that it was so. Now, since the wars of the French Revolution, armies have completely done away with the tents on account of the encumbrance they cause. Partly it is found better for an army of 100,000 men to have, in place of 6,000 tent horses, 5,000 additional cavalry, or a couple of hundred extra guns. Partly it has been found that in great and rapid operations a lot of tents is a hindrance and of little use. Now this is interesting because it gives you a dimension of how much, logistically speaking, just tents occupy, right? That's something we often forget. Also, just in terms of here, you see 5,000 additional cavalry, because otherwise they would have had, thousands of horses. In fact, adapted normally to those logistical needs. You understand also what the consequences of this are, as von Clausewitz will explain it now. Basically, Napoleonic warfare, most troops would stay out there under the sky, or humble shelter they found, and not much else. Not that in previous times actually also other situations weren't like that, but von Clausewitz points out rightfully how things had gone improving naturally with modern armies, and yet the Napoleonic wars give this tremendous boost, or better, properly the French Revolution, to mobility, for which this is the main reason, as you understand. This condition just of even of insecurity that derives from the instability of the system, and this is so clear in many ways. I mean, you understand even here the logic of warfare, how it comes to sacrifice actually a large number of people themselves, and that's how you sadly give a price to lives, for example, and that makes you understand well Clausewitz in theory how this perfectly connects just to a political decision altogether, because that's what war is at the end of the day about. So the way war changes is exactly also why politics decides so, society decides, makes it to be so. And as we have seen in this case, von Clausewitz will actually talk about it now, but the troops are sacrificed. Right, so you understand here in the broader improvement in warfare that we have described, von Clausewitz himself described in terms of Napoleonic warfare brought on the fore, something that shows you the might now of the new system, not just because of the quantity, but how in civilization terms it happens. The larger the system you have to control it, the more you necessitate to be advanced, right? And that's what we often tend to confuse also. It's not that having an ultra, expansive technological thing is the answer, right? You are advanced as a civilization as long as you are able to work with more stuff at once, right? All together, and And warfare and the individual people get crushed in the process, yes, but still to a positive objective that will basically save others. So this is a very interesting philosophy of history could be drawn from the Vom Kriege among the broad the information that we have about this issue, because it makes you understand. Think about it historically speaking, thinking about the difference between tribes and ecumenic empires, but thinking about even this linear process that we're seeing here in the modern age, how improvement arrives. Not improvement arrives by becoming kinder towards people, right? But still doing something greater that is as cold, as brutal as it can be. That still contains an improvement in it. And so this is also, in a processual way, I would say it's not that war necessarily makes the benefit of the people, but I mean for the positive intention that the political action has, that's what you do things for. I mean, to have a gain, at least for yourself, in that regard, could easily stand at some point about some moral level, but that's really not the case. Now, or better, how we shouldn't mix morality with politics, because that's pretty debatable, right? Is that good, even just in moral terms, to mix moral with politics? The answer, the question here is, I would like to make you understand really from every one of these small. Now I'm digressing a little bit because the text is short, so I have more time. But the idea here is that's why we study things. Right, I know plenty of you don't even click on this, will not watch this video anyhow for that reason. And this stuff because you say, it's boring. This is not about history. This is about camps of this weird guy from the 19th century, Prussia. That's right, but who cares? That's where you'll miss the best part. Right, because you can't read history but through what this pattern is, right? That is not an opinion, it's literally an explanation of what happens. And that's something which altogether it's not particularly easy even just to acknowledge, right? It's easier to think that reality is simpler than it seems, but that unavoidably brings to great confusion, because reality is really simpler than it seems, but it's usually not in the way we think. And until you don't get that perspective, you get tricked. So please study the Vom Kriege, because it's really worth the time. Then von Clausewitz says, but this change is attended, so this one from the French Revolution onwards, with two drawbacks, that is, an increase of casualties in the force and greater wasting of the country. Right. This is also evident by itself. The increase of casualties, we'll see it now. The greater wasting of the country is self-explanatory. I mean, the more, you fundamentally dynamicize warfare, and the more you tend to just go here and there and to suck more effectively the local resources. Otherwise, you should suck them dry at some point, but mostly concentrate on this broader logistical need to stay there, to remain there. Here, it's naturally also a quantitative dimension to be entailed. That is, the armies are larger, heavier, they demand more. So there is all a part that we will see also on the subsistence of the army supplies. We'll see that small detachments, but not even detachments, small corps even, can fundamentally live off the land in the 19th century without any logistical need. As long as the local country is intact, fundamentally, if there are farmlands and so on, it's not been devastated by war before. It's also not a problem, which usually the case is, so it's not so positivistic as you can think. So now we see how, especially the increase of casualties in the forces, we're saying before, this lower protection of the troops. Clausewitz says, however slight the protection afforded by a roof of common tent cloth, it cannot be denied that on a long continuance it is great relief to the troops. For a single day, the difference is small, because a tent is little protection against wind and cold and does not completely exclude wet. But this small difference, if repeated 200 or 300 times in a year, becomes important, right? For a night, you can't do that. For a month, for an entire season, starts becoming really imposing. And a great, in terms of physical strain, simply, and a greater loss through sickness is just a natural result. There are no antibiotics here. People died like flies. In fact, they died more of illness than combat. So, how the devastation of the country is increased through the want of tents for the troops requires no explanation. Right? So, that's why you love von Clausewitz, because only apparently, a kind-hearted person, and I understand it, even just if it is for not even for a moral problem, but a simple sensitivity, says, first time you read a phrase like this, you say, but what the hell, this guy then must be a psychopath. It's really not. On the contrary, he's telling you, paradoxically, what will kill less people altogether, right? And this is what it's difficult to understand, because as I was saying before, getting the bigger picture is hard, and until you don't do it, there's no way you're going to understand it by definition. So, once again, evaluate it. In this case, von Clausewitz was just actually saying, that's not even the part in which we have to describe how to, the devastation increases, or how even it's carried out, let's say implicitly. Excuse me, I drink a little bit. Then, von Clausewitz says, one would suppose that on account of these two reactionary influences, the doing away with tents must have diminished again the energy of war in another way. The troops must remain longer in quarters, and from want of the requisites for encampment must forego many positions which would have been possible had tents been forthcoming. This would indeed have been the case had there not been, in the same epoch of time, an enormous revolution in war generally, which swallowed up in itself all these smaller subordinate influences. Right? That is to say, altogether, even this thing of the tent, as we've seen, is caused as a minor evil, right? The loss of the exposure of troops, compared to the broader needs that are caused by a broader strength, broader force that is fundamentally happening, that is leading war, right? So, von Clausewitz says, the elementary fire of war has become so overpowering, its energy so extraordinary. Here's describing the broader also consequences of the state of beings that make, whether you use tents or not, paradoxically, in spite of as we've seen, the mass deaths that causes among your own troops, what really matters, says, its energy so extraordinary that these regular periods of rest have also have disappeared. Right, so thinking of encampment, that's not because you're a sadistic, in fact, person that you don't want your troops to rest, under a good shelter. It's that literally you can't do it. Because you're under constant threat of annihilation. You have to move up. And there is not even time to think about this, suspension of warfare that, makes troops quartering there and spending time going back and forth. No, it's a constant movement. It's a constantly energetical, whirlwind, let's say that swallows everything else. And von Clausewitz then says, and every power presses forward with present force towards the great decision, which will be treated of more fully in the 9th book. Under these circumstances, therefore, any question about effects on an army from the discontinuance of the use of tents in the field is quite thrown into the shade. Troops now occupy huts or bivouac under the canopy of heaven, without regard to season of the year, weather, or locality, just according as the general plan and object of the campaign require. Whether war will in the future continue, so you understand it, right? That's literally all they get as a shelter in those times. And whether war will in the future continue to maintain under all circumstances and at all times this energy is a question we shall consider hereafter, where this energy is wanting. The want of tense is calculated to exercise some influence on the conduct of war, but that this reaction will ever be strong enough to bring back the use of tense is very doubtful, because now that much wider limits have been opened for the elements of war, it will never return within its old narrow bounds, except occasionally for a certain time and under certain circumstances, only to break out again with all the all-powerful force of its nature. This phrase is prophetic, as you understand, but it's a great deep take from also in here, not just a philosophy of history, but probably of a historical vision of von Clausewitz, because he gives this development as unavoidable, right? I don't know how much positive, or even positive, that von Clausewitz is not a positivist by the slightest, right? On the contrary, it's just a big punch in the face, dude. But it's ever more meaningful in that regard that he states that at this point in history, war will come back to blow up, let's say everything. In that scale, and therefore, even if this thing of the tense is, as you've seen, just aside from the fact of a minor element altogether, the conduct of war, but also, it may come back to certain, even entrenchment. Think about World War the First, right? That there was an eminently tactical reason that will bring once again to a sort of quartering on a regular basis, also in the face of the enemy, a situation that will be highly, let's say, as you've seen, statical, at least as far as the Western Front was concerned, the Alpine Front was concerned, but in others also not, so that is to say it's not just a merely tactical problem, actually it's not even close to that altogether in the system. But the question here is how von Clausewitz realizes that this war is growing, that, human civilization is expanding at a very fast pace, and he observes, as long as things are going to stay that fluid, troops will be not able to to stay back in tents for a long time, or in another form of encampment, because this will require them to habitually be on the move, right? Which is something that altogether it's what happens today, right? World War First, you see it, is the exception, but it's not the exception because of the dynamic that here is von Clausewitz is tracing. That's because there was even more force invested, and the balance of it at many levels from a strategical point of view came to stop a front line for 5 years from Switzerland to the North Sea, just moving from a few kilometers. But altogether, if those troops had been to be on the move, which they would get at a certain point, they would get once again on the move, and it would be pretty damn fast. So the thing would have not changed, let's say, proper from Napoleonic times. This is also, in fact, in this broader linear development. And this is also interesting to actually understand the nature of things like World War the First, because you see, von Clausewitz has been even criticized by people, once again, didn't understand much of his thought, exactly by saying, look, also this whole influence of Napoleonic warfare is being destroyed by World War the First. A doctrinal problem and misunderstanding of the class, the military class that led, that had to study eventually how the war would have been fought by the tanks of the 20th century is one thing. Clausewitz in theory is a wholly different issue, and von Clausewitz didn't exclude the possibility that this thing would happen, right? Again. Right, it's not pertaining to the Clausewitzian theory. The idea that it would be he got it. There was a broader development of warfare with ever more force involved, and altogether, this is exactly what happened. War is today, can't say necessarily faster, extensionally speaking, but it's way more dynamic. It's ever more kinetic, and yes, generally speaking, it's also faster. It's a matter of average. It's a matter of how you gotta be on the move. A lot of things change altogether, but maintaining the essence of this intensity that, goes at war like, goes at the encampments of reenactment for a certain time of the year, and then goes and then goes away. It's, for seasonally speaking, it doesn't work like that, right? Obviously, it couldn't work like that anymore, right? Up to a certain point, it had worked in a somewhat similar way. There is a lot of continuity of this. I can't relate easily for even just the Middle Ages. There are many examples, even just of those were mostly fortifications, but also literally certain places where people came back and forth to make war from a certain position, and I don't know, and set an encampment. So whatever, here maybe I'm mixing up too much, but the concept is definitely clear, right? That as long as war is going to be that dynamic, there can't be properly a staticity, a slowing down, right? A too great suspension of the act of war, in other terms. So von Clausewitz then says, permanent arrangements for an army must therefore be based only upon that nature. I mean, the all-powerful force of war, right? And this is basically it. So it's really all for today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.